brought a successful election contest suit against DFL candidate Curtis Johnson, having violated the Constitution's residency requirements. Now we are suing to ensure that Minnesota holds a lawful election to replace the vacancy caused by that election contest. It is unfortunate that the Democrats put the residents of Roseville and Shoreview in a position to not have a representative for a short period of time. But Walz exacerbated the Democrats' errors by illegally calling for a special election that, if it occurs, would invite more uncertainty, litigation, and delays filling the seat. Governor Walz should have done that right thing and called for an election in compliance with election law. The Republican Party of Minnesota will continue to stand up for Minnesotans by enduring fair elections that are conducted in compliance with the letter of the law. Thank you.
Thanks. Now I'm going to turn over to James to do some comments.
Sure. I'm James Dickey from the Upper Midwest Law Center. I also represent Minnesota Voters Alliance along with Allie Howell and Greg Ryan and Chris Bakeman, who are individual plaintiffs who live in House District 40B, who also object to this. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it right over to Andy Seelick, Executive Director of Minnesota Voters Alliance, to make a few comments, and then the attorneys, Ryan and I, can take questions about the legal merits of the complaint and things like that, and any questions about any policy-based stuff or any questions specific to the party or the Voters Alliance, you can ask them directly. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Thanks, everybody, for coming down and bearing the cold temperatures. My name is Andy Seelick. I'm the Executive Director for the Minnesota Voters Alliance. And I was just thinking on the way down here, this is our 5th case going to the Minnesota Supreme Court in 5 years. And we're pretty excited about this case because there's a lot of the confidence crisis we have among voters in the confidence in our elections is that we believe, from what our vantage point, is at an all-time low. And this action by Governor Walz is a perfect example of why this is. When our elected leaders believe they can make up their own rules, interpret statutes that are crystal clear in our view, voters' trust is broken and the entire system breaks down. The solution is very simple. Governor Walz and Secretary Simon just need to follow the law. House District 40B cannot be used to manipulate the will of the legislature or its laws. We're confident that the Minnesota Supreme Court will stop this attempt to pervert the legal process. Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So the Democratic, don't you have to, I mean, if there's a special election, at some point goes forward if you guys a few weeks. Is this really worth it?
Well,
Always worth it to make sure that the rule of law is followed.
The leaders of the are lawyers. Just said that the precedent on the case, again, when the House was tied and a member is deemed not eligible to serve, the courts have ruled and the precedent says that the House is the final jurisdiction. Do you disagree that that precedent would be followed?
Well, the Constitution is clear that the House does have the ability to decide its own members. That's separate from when an election gets to be called, so who those members can be gets decided. I mean, the legislature has spoken, and it's the governor's call to issue a writ, and it has some mandatory duties as to when that writ should be called. And so the special election is a predicate matter before they can decide who these members are.
Yeah, and let me just add to that the special election statute specifically says, and that's the legislature passing it, the governor signing it way back when, that the governor has to call a special election. So the legislature has spoken as to when the governor should call a special election. The answer is 204D.19 subdivision 4, which says that if an election contest causes a vacancy, which is what happened here, place either 22 days after the start of the session, or if the legislature by resolution says that they're not going to review the House election contest and that they're going to accept that, for example, in this case, Curtis Johnson is not going to take his seat, at that point, Governor Walz could issue the writ 5 days after the beginning of the session.
Should it follow the Bob Barrett precedent then when the special election was held well into that case?
I'm not sure exactly which case you're referring to in this instance.
It was the last residency challenge that was successful.
I don't know off the top of my head, yeah.
Well, one thing we have seen, though, in our research is whether it be this or notice requirements in particular, there are a lot of instances where the laws have not been complied with, and we think, and it's why the Republican Party of Minnesota is bringing this law, it's important to say that the laws matter, and whether it be notice requirements or the timing of calling special, it should be done in compliance with the law. Close is not good enough when it comes to elections.
For how fast do you expect or the court would have to weigh in? Because I think early voting probably starts this week, right? Friday primary?
Yeah, so the court's already issued an order today at about 12:55 PM. It was just issued. I haven't had much of a chance to digest what it says, other than service has to be completed by today at 4 PM. I believe it says, if I recall correctly, that by Friday, the respondents will have to answer. I believe next Monday, we have a reply brief we can file, and a hearing will be on January 15th. I think it's 10 AM at the Judicial Center.
So the hearing will come after voting, after the primary?
There is no primary right now set.
Okay, oh, that's right, because there's no,
Right.
not, it's only SD6, okay.
Right,
never mind.
yeah.
I was confused.
SD60 is
I think it's
different.
important, James, you also had some examples that you brought for the court where special elections have been canceled almost up until the
Oh,
day
yeah.
before the election.
Yeah, so in the recall petition filed against KT Jacobs in Columbia Heights last year, KT Jacobs went to the Supreme Court eventually and argued, and successfully argued, that the recall election was improper, inappropriate, and the Supreme Court canceled the February election on February 9th. So the court has up until right before the special election to do that. We, of course, would hope the court would act as quickly as possible, given early voting exists.
Until February 27th, essentially.
We think that's,
January 27th.
we think the court has until January 27th, but the court can act sooner, of course.
Governor Walz's office is referring to 204D.1, and they're referring to special election when legislature will be in session, which says that it needs to be called as soon as possible. Can you explain why that statute would not apply?
Because subdivision 4, they're looking at subdivision 2, and subdivision 2 does not apply when there's a the election contest that causes a vacancy, and that's what happened here. So the vacancy is caused by the special election and no other cause, because Curtis Johnson could not have resigned from anything on December 27th when the writ was issued. So the writ was improper on December 27th. We haven't seen a new writ issued, a recall, a preview, anything like that. Could change the calculus if Governor Walz decides to issue a new writ. We don't have that in front of us right now. What we have is it caused only by a special election, which even, I mean, Curtis Johnson's letter, special election is what called it. So, after the legislative session begins is the first day a writ can be issued unless the legislature acts.
How do you feel about a high court? Minnesota has not politicized judicial races. The majority have been appointed by Democrats. They tend to have a nonpartisan reputation. About cases like this, I might be seeing multiple cases with a lot of political implications.
Yeah, you know, we're confident in the Minnesota Supreme Court's ability to be a nonpartisan arbiter of these cases. James and I were here with the same plaintiffs, petitioners, back in October. We brought a challenge against Hennepin County for not appropriately staffing its absentee ballot board, and this same Supreme Court, ruled in these parties' favors.
So to clarify, because the Senator Dietzig seat is not resulting from an election contest, it has different areas of statute that govern that way. So I know it's not your issue, but do you feel that timing of that special election is proper?
I mean, I don't have any real comment on the Senate District 60 race, because we brought this race because it was because of the election contest that the vacancy resulted, so the writ was clearly improper, and the writ was clearly improper then. The writ right now for the Dietzig seat, Senate District 60, that's, the writ itself was issued after the vacancy occurred in that case.
I will add one caveat to that. And so one of the other, there's two in this lawsuit. One is that the writ should not have been issued until at least 22 days after the first day of session, or 5 days if they come together and want to accelerate that, and they establish a quorum and they can pass a resolution. But the other issue is regarding notice. And so there's a requirement that there must be at least 5 days' notice before the end of the period for affidavit. 26th, a day before the writ was issued. That same issue is at play in Senate District 6, part of this lawsuit. But it appears there that the 5-day notice period was not followed.
And I would like to add just one point to that, which is that through special elections there's actually a website on the Legislative Reference Library site that talks about, has all the special elections and the examples of the writs being given. And the notice by the governors often seem to comply with the 5-day notice requirement of the statute. So we think it's important that the court does exactly what kind of notice is necessary in statutes to comply with that. Yeah.
I missed it. Did you say what time period Governor Walz has to respond to this lawsuit?
I believe by Friday.
By Friday?
That's,
Okay.
if I remember, the court issued an order at, I think, 12:55 p.m. today.
Okay, thank you.
You can just clarify the timeline of what you think it should be, 22 days from January 14th?
Yes.
That-
Yeah, as 22 days from January 14th is that a writ could issue. unless the legislature, you're establishing, coming to a resolution that they want they're able to issue the writ earlier.
Sure, but they're doing 22 days from today, which was the 28th.
The statute says that the legislative session, the first day of session, day of term, change in the last half about when the term starts, when the session starts, when it matters in terms of can issue.
Mr. Chair, could you talk about the new chairman taking on this issue? It's kind of a big issue in office.
As I've said, when I got elected, I thought I was the political business, but in fact, I've gotten into the fire hose. It's been like that, but opportunity like this to Republican parties admitted it's right for this state.
What would be your Governor Walz alleging that they were Republicans to prevent Democrats from being seated?
I assume that question was directed to me. Well, I'd say the Republican Party is all about the rule of law. And if the law is clear about what should or shouldn't be done, far be it from us to shy away from that. So the Republican Party itself is all about the rule of law. If we didn't think there was a law being broken here, or that the governor wasn't following the statutes, we wouldn't be here standing today. Thank you.
Can I, again, maybe Mr. Dickey, be good to answer this? Just to kind of understand how these statutes work together. Let's say Johnson loses that case and that day Becker Finn resigns. Now there's a vacancy due to a resignation. Do you now move into the other part of that statute?
I haven't gotten deep enough into what would happen if that happened, but if there was a vacancy caused by Jamie Becker Finn's resignation, while she, there's only like, 2 weeks left in her term or something like that, I don't recall, but I think subdivision 1 of that statute or subdivision 2 might provide an answer to that. But she wouldn't be, that wouldn't be a vacancy because of an election contest, so it's a different subdivision of the statute.
And the speaker said that current reps are not current reps right now, that their terms had expired. Do you?
Yeah, I don't even really know what that means, but what I would say is that the legislature in 2023 changed the law so that the term law is still the same, 204D.02, subdivision 2, I think. The session law, 3.011, was amended so that the session begins on the first Tuesday after the second Monday instead of the first Tuesday after the first Monday. So there's like this gap, and how that impacts this case has yet to be seen. The courts have never had a chance to interpret that statute and how they interplay with the vacancies.
On the notice, the issue of the notice, so let's say the court sides with you in this case. Does that necessarily invalidate also the SD 60 special, or would another lawsuit be required, or TBD, we don't know?
I think there would be clear precedent that the notice would not have been sufficient in SD 60 if the court were to decide in our favor on that. Whether the court even reaches that question, because the court could decide that the writ was invalid first and then not reach the notice. Right. So it's speculative at this point. What I would say is that if, in fact, that is the case and the court goes in our favor on the notice issue, that there has to be 5 days notice and the writ has to be issued such that there is ability for candidates to have 5 days to get their affidavits in, then that would certainly be precedent that would apply to the other one. And so whether someone might bring a lawsuit at that point to challenge that, or even sooner before that to challenge that, which I don't know about, could be true.
And you're obviously asking for expedited. I mean, the
Oh, yeah.
court's already ticking.
Yeah, so
How
the-
quickly do you need or want action?
Well, look, we asked the court, look, we pulled this together as quickly as we possibly could have to avoid any prejudice to anybody to the extent possible. Lawsuits are always a pain, right? But in this case, we tried to go as fast as we could, and we asked the court to set a hearing date as fast as possible. The court largely followed what we requested in our petition in terms of what dates to provide for hearings and for briefing. So, a briefing schedule of, everyone's served today, the parties have all been served now, by the way. But everyone's served today, they have to respond by Friday. We get a reply on Monday, and then next Wednesday is a hearing in the Supreme Court. It's a pretty quick turnaround, and we've tried our best to try to make it as fast as possible.
So this is being heard by the Minnesota Supreme Court then?
Yes.
Is Wednesday set for sure, or is that what you're asking?
That's what the court has set.
Okay.
I don't know if that will change. I don't think it will, but that's what the court has set.
And again, does that signal confidence in the judicial system that they are taking this seriously and going quickly?
I think that's the nature of, that original district to the Supreme Court, and they have to move fast.
The statute says they got to go civil with these, and the courts honored that. And a good example, we filed that petition 14th in the court October 29th with an opinion to follow. I think a good job in these.
Do rule before, I expect them to time to remedy the election happen once the voters, cast their vote, their will, and the statute really able to get this relief election happens.
On to that too, like that as the chairman, you don't have a situation where it was called basically, and then someone comes to the court after and creates havoc, right? So this petition being brought before as soon as possible is avoiding the catastrophe potentially caused by Governor Walz issuing this writ and delaying things even further and having further chaos and antipathy in the House of Representatives. So it's important that we get the law right at the beginning, and that's what we've done.
Could you comment on how special, in particular, negatively affects, or particularly, I'm director of the Libertarian Party of Minnesota.
Well, I think that, as to your interest, but I would say, obviously, as we've pointed out in the petition, there was a failure of notice. I don't know whether that affected your ability to get candidates on the ballot. I know in the petition we allege and supporting that the 2022 candidate from the Republican Party for Roseville and Shoreview was not able to get his affidavit of candidacy in because Governor Walz's writ didn't provide for adequate notice.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yep, thank you all.
By the way, I have a press release from the Libertarian Party.
Good job. That 22 days. So we're saying they can't issue their permit until 22 days after why they did this. Okay.